takeaway.
What? Whoa!
Is this some kind of fetish thing? Well, where Genesis Rising did not resonate, apparently Homeworld 3 has. So, holy shit. Still, even though I've racked my brain for weeks now thinking about the story of Homeworld 3, and we will get into that later, there's still a lot else to consider, like gameplay modes. 3 is heavily banking on one called War Games, which is a roguelike mode you can play in co-op. Apparently this isn't a side activity, but it's supposed to be the main draw of the game. At least that's how it comes across when the entire post-launch support plan is all about War Games. There will be some new maps and other changes to Skirmish, but wow, they are all in on War Games. It is worth pointing that out because I mainly bought this for the campaign, but I will talk about all that stuff afterwards. A lot of features and mechanics obviously blanket cover the whole game, but if that is supposed to be the selling point of the game, I'll spend more time on that than I would normally. Okay, so to give some story background, Homeworld 2 ended with the Age of Sajet. The magical hyperspace cores were slapped in the ancient vessel Sejuk, and the network of galactic hyperspace gates were opened. This brought a new age of peace and prosperity, and Karen was truly the chosen one. Homeworld 2's story wasn't so good, but it's been over a century since then. You now play as Imogen Sajet, the granddaughter or pupil of Karen Sajet. She hangs out with Imogen when she's 6 or 7 and likes to sing lullabies to her. And I promise this is all relevant, because this is the most directly character-driven story in the franchise. Usually a character was a stand-in for an entire people or an ideology, and Deserts broke off from that a little bit, but there were bigger things going on than individual character arcs. Anyways, Imogen is a genius, and the granddaughter of the leader of Kith Sajet. She earns points fast too, because she seems to want to undo the prophecies and mysticism of the second game.
The synthetic hyperspace cores I designed were perfect, and I was to begin training a team of navigators. They were going to usher in a new age for my people, freeing us from reliance on ancient, unfathomable progenitor technology.
So far, so good. However, Imogen has been chosen to be fleet command for a new mothership. Being entombed inside of a ship is now called being a navigator. Before they were called Unbound, but it's the same thing, new name. The rush into service is due to something called the Anomaly, which is affecting the hyperspace network. After a few Boeing tier malfunctions, Karen Sajet was sent back in with her ship, the Kar Sejuk. She went beyond contact, but the anomaly stopped, and that was 20 years ago. Until now, when the anomaly region suddenly reactivated and threw out tons of space debris, killing billions. It's too targeted to be random, so something is trying to wipe out all of galactic civilization, and the stakes are impossibly high.
Every simulation we've run results in the total collapse of galactic civilization.
So Imogen, already having made synthetic hyperspace cores and basically being the leading expert on the subject, makes the most sense to send in immediately because there's no time to train other navigators. The journey takes you across the galaxy trying to find the source of the anomaly and trying to find out what happened to Karen Sajet 20 years ago. Without spoiling anything, the story feels a bit like Homeworld 2 2.0. A lot of the concepts here were planned for the original 2, but they proved too ambitious and demanding for 2003. Like having gigantic megastructures you can navigate inside and around, compared to the actual release, which just had them mainly in the background. There were some structures, but not too mega, and even the remasters didn't try to touch that up. They did pull off having these massive structures, but let's look at everything else visual too.
I see!
When it comes to the interface, the good news is that some improvements are made after the public demo because the game was delayed again. Even though there are tabs I wish I could remove like gameplay events or speech recall, you can at least scale the entire interface now. In fact, all the controls and visual indicators are extremely customizable. You can even choose a baseline preset, in my case the Homeworld Remaster controls, and then work from there. It can take time to get all your space paperwork in order, or your fleet roster will switch around if there's an option buried for it somewhere, but the big ones can be taken care of, and the one to point out especially is N-Lips, which stands for Nonlinear Inverse Perspective Scrolling. In human terms, in the old games when you zoomed out, some ship models would actually scale up a bit, just to make them more easily selectable and see what they're doing, and if you zoomed in, it would go back to the normal scale. The effect worked so well that it was fairly hard to notice if you didn't know about it. As for Homeworld 3, it was bad in the demo, so they added a scaling option, and it's still fucking horrible. These are tiny strike craft, and the sense of scale is completely broken. For reference, here's how big it should actually be. Where you couldn't tell before, you can almost see the ships actually scaling with the camera this round. I'd imagine if you don't know about this setting, it makes the scale and feel of fights incredibly strange, to the point that it looks like fighters would barely fit inside the carriers they're chasing, or your tiny probes look like large warships. And this is all on the bare minimum scaling option. There's a chance you still might find this handy, but for the most part, this looks insane, so I'd recommend most people turn that off. Because with all the tools at your disposal, it's still easy to keep track of things. It's just that now you could do it without your ships. Oh, fuck. Anyway, I do like the look of the new mothership, the Kar Kushan. Compared to the Pride of Hagara, this does properly look meant for war and exploration. If you did like the old vertical view, you can rotate it, and there are a few cases where that's helpful in combat. It has point defense weapons on rails on the sides of it, so you can rotate it around to get a better firing solution. You don't get an opportunity that often, but it is cool when you do. It's a very sleek and efficient ship, and the same can be said for the entire Hagaran fleet. For example, this time around frigates come in all kinds of variations, but this time you can really tell they're a variant. When you inspect them, you can see the different weapons, the size of the hull can change around. The previous games were like this too, but the roster was more spread across the classes. You could have 5 kinds of strike craft that looked radically different, or move up into different kinds of corvettes, or even capital ships. They had clear design styles, and even with Homeworld 2 having a more space boat look, they still kept that. So going back to Homeworld 3 frigates, individually they are well thought out and well designed spacecraft. They look appropriate for their role and are fitting for what Hagara is now. They're sleek, wedge-shaped death machines, but in a group, they get tricky to tell apart. It's not really a gameplay issue because you should be grouping them properly, but as a collective, they're just not that visually interesting, and the one ship that does break the mold is the support frigate. Again, they are all the same ship class, so this does make sense logically. The problem is the rest of the roster. Hagarans now only have one kind of corvette, which does look to be an evolution of a mover. When you get a destroyer, it's the same wedge shape as the frigates. And the battlecruiser gets wider, but it's a similar profile. Thankfully, the carrier is an exception, and there are other unique designs inside the fleet, but most of it is incredibly uniform now. There could still be a theme to this, like the Hagarans are completely united and their enemies have varying ships because they're not. The thing is, the faction you fight for most of the game, the Incarnate, has the exact same problem. Most of their roster looks like deformed cigars, which you would think would stand out from your own ships, but together, they're still remarkably similar. For how many designs and silhouettes this franchise has had, most of them now being a funky rectangle, feels very underwhelming. You know, when you went to the Garden of Kadesh, they were a branch of your own people, but their ships still felt exotic and alien. The Incarnate seem like they should be even more bizarre than you, but visually, they're pretty similar. And I don't know if it's that way thematically, or if they're supposed to be easier to pick out when playing something like war games. They're slightly taller craft, but I wish they twisted that farther. To clarify, I don't think they're bad designs, but I think each faction needed more ships to break those molds. It's still a visually gorgeous game. The space structures are impossibly gigantic, but also full of detail. Regardless of the designs, all the ships are high fidelity too, especially for a strategy game. They can still have creative animations and other nice little touches to them. Even down to the smallest craft, there was a lot of love put into these. It's still one of those games where it's tempting to zoom in on a ship and watch the action for a while. There's great use of light and shadows, and some parts do look amazing. There's some really visceral destruction effects this time too, which does make it a shame there's no proper ramming. As for what I don't like, this is another one of those Unreal games without separated post-processing options, which means you can't control individual effects like bloom or depth of field. On top of that, most maps have some kind of dust or fog or particle clouds around. Then you have your limited anti-aliasing options and then DLSS or whatever upscaler you choose if you go that route. But in short, and it might not show up on YouTube, there's this subtle kind of blur effect over everything. Your ships are already being obscured by fog most of the time, and then you have the rendering settings on top of that. There's not a single map just out in the void of space. There are other problems attached to that, which I'll get into soon, but it's funny that the closer you get to that, the more your ships actually pop out. Even though the remasters are years old now, they have this sharp clarity to them that 3 doesn't. And no, this isn't my first rodeo, there are plenty of other Unreal titles drowning in post-processing nowadays. But man, I wish more games still give you direct control of those options. It's still a very pretty game, just keep in mind it's also a CPU-bound one. Your settings should be fine most of the time, but the big battles can always chug. To take a more radical turn, I also want to talk about the cutscenes. It was a very slow march to get here, but you could still track it. In games like the original or Cataclysm, you could tell the Kushan were humanoid, but you weren't quite sure if they were human. It seemed like they could be, but they were always obscured in shadow or had strange designs that made you second guess, because they weren't really the focus.
Kingdom Hearts 2 has screwed us again!
The captain of the Kunlun is a character, but really, he represents all of Kith Samta. Karen Sajet is also a character, but really, she's all the Kushan. Fleet Intelligence is also just another facet of that. All of the Bentus you run into in the franchise are voiced by Campbell Lane. They could be the exact same character, but it doesn't matter. He's essentially all the Bentusi, and your lizard brain gets that. Then Homeworld 2 came and said, they're all definitely human by the way. The cutscenes still maintain that style, and there wasn't personal human drama. I mean, I guess there was Makan, but whatever his people were up to, it was so unclear. They were actually called the Vagar. Then you have deserts, and they're even more on the screen, and there's a little more human drama. It is weaker compared to the greater underlying tragedy of everything else going on, but it drove the story forward and was ultimately a minor detail in that bigger story. So when 3 opens with Imogen in full view humming her comfort lullaby, it seems like it might be deserts and this will taper off. But you soon come to realize this is going to be a character drama. There is now a human face attached to everything and everyone. It's a subtle effect, but it manages to undercut some things.
Hear me now. I use your barbaric tongue to deliver an ultimatum.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, give me a second. There he is! Just in case you thought the Incarnate might be aliens or something strange. Or, God forbid, thinking that the ship might really represent the character.
This is Pack Leader Baldroka. I have demands of your Sage.
Who?
Maybe this was inevitable with the RPGs and other spin-off media it has. It feels like we've lost a lot of mystique. Beyond that, the more simple cutscenes from before were something unique about the games. Now we're firmly in the uncanny valley. They're going for high fidelity, but character lines don't quite match the lip syncing, but above that, the characters can be wildly over-animated for their delivery.
I don't... This isn't... Where am I? Intel, this is Fleet Command. Please come in. Does anyone read me? Saints and sinners, how did I get here?
I'm not sure why they went with this direction, but I did find something interesting while reading the game's manual, which was written by Homeworld's original writer. It has all the new history, ship information, but something else caught my attention. It's Imogen's first line, which, if you read it before the game, is her introduction. Just Imogen is fine. My project director told me I had to put a human face on things, so here I am. I thought that was interesting.
Ponder that.
When it comes to the game's soundscape, overall, it's still great. You hear the rattling of ballistics and the punch of heavier weapons, and it maintains the professionals under stress voice acting.
Capture target secured, but they are not too happy about it. Ops, advise caution during crew transfer.
There have been some noticeable changes. Some sound effects like explosions seem to be more muffled this round. I don't know if that's to balance it against the rest of the mix, or if it's supposed to be more internal explosion. Which would be an odd choice because Homeworld never cared about realistic sound for the better, but it was the one thing there that made me curious. As for voiceover, it's the busiest the games have ever been, with one interesting exception.
Group 1 copies.
When selected, units no longer declare their group number, but instead the groups are more accounted for in the dynamic battle chatter. You're fed more direct information from Imogen.
Watch Group 2, they're taking losses.
That's a fine trade-off because there's so much battle chatter now, when a group is mentioned, that means you should be paying attention. Also, unlike Karen, who was trained for the position a long time, Imogen was rushed into it. Karen typically kept it cool, but you would hear some pain in her voice if she announced the ship loss of something like a carrier. Because Imogen isn't as experienced, you hear her breaking a little more when things go south.
Group 7, support needed.
A resource controller has been destroyed. We have lost a resource controller.
It's a clever and subtle way of showing how her character is different than Karen without something more ham-fisted. And let me tell you, Machine for Pigs didn't have as many ham-fists as some of these cutscenes. But in the main game, everything is very good. Like, ships will even announce what they're engaging and add more direct context into the fight.
Lead into it. Yes, copy. Threat identified. Enemy carrier. Fast and loose, in and out. Group engineering replace those relays, so this is going to be a short trip.
While it is very good, my only letdown on this front was the music. It's the same composer, he's still using a wide amount of instruments, but the music is much more ambient.
Hostile Corvette. ID confirmed.
Engaging on our position. Engaging.
Another Corvette down.
it's understated in a way the previous games haven't been. Like someone had an idea that the music shouldn't be too bombastic or else that'll distract from the gameplay. I cranked it up in the mix, and there were times where it was hard to tell if music was playing at all, and it usually was, just very spaced out percussion. I mean, even the cutscenes, which are completely curated and you can time them however you want, still don't have high energy. The final mission music sounded like it could be anywhere else in the game. It is so strange, especially considering where things were before.
Copy. Move order confirmed.
Group 10 reports enemy contact.
Confirmed. Moving to destination. Heavy fire confirmed. Ready.
Cryogenic trays have been processed, and our colonists are safe for now.
I guess it's good there's so much unit chatter. Maybe someone thought the music would interrupt that? There is one solid moment, but it's a spoiler, so that'll have to be for later. It's still a fleeting one, and I don't know why the rest is like this. It is disappointing, but otherwise, I would still say the audio and visuals of the game are in a good spot. Actually, I would say they're currently the best part of the game. So now you know I'm about to talk some shit. Talking gameplay, I'm going to assume you know about Homeworld. Either you've played it, you've watched my videos, you've watched someone else's, it doesn't matter. I don't want to be retreading a lot, but I will start with what's good. Having so many control and interface options around is welcome. There's a hotkey for selecting damaged units in a group, and it makes redocking for repairs easy. You can go as far as customizing the exact percentage that would count as damaged. Your shipbuilding icon shows how many you already have, which could be redundant, but it is nice. If you find everything too overwhelming, you can pause or slow down the game to give orders in. I don't use it, but it's a handy option, and the game has tons of handy options and features like that. I could go through a lot, but the problem is the basic things that aren't in the game or non-functional. Then add on a pile of behavior problems, missing features from previous games that would have made a lot of sense here, and then the general balance on top of all of that. So let's start with Grug Brain RTS basics. Unit stances are a good place to start. Will they chase their enemies, hold their ground and shoot, or do nothing? In previous Homeworld games, these would affect a ship's maneuverability and firepower. Aggressive would have you dish out more firepower while being less maneuverable, and evasive was the opposite, and neutral was a nice balance. There were also tactics, which is usually what you think of stances being, where it decides how they engage with the enemy. Do they chase them or hold still? 3 only has regular RTS stances, which is a step down, but the behaviors are bizarre, because they're also kind of combined with the old stance system. So aggressive ships chase enemies down until one of them dies. Simple. Then neutral ships will chase enemies a short distance, but are mainly just defending themselves or nearby vessels. But they'll also try to maneuver around objects in space to use them as cover. So for example, you can't send fighters out to chase something using less firepower but using cover, you can only choose between those two options. Those don't really go together, but then there's the third option, which is passive, where a ship does not attack unless it's attacked. That turns it into a bit of a brick, but what if you have a long-range ship like a torpedo or ion frigate and you want it to hold position and fire from max range? Not only is that not possible to order, but torpedo frigates are completely broken. They only fire from max range and will even retreat back in order to do so. If you've played the game and wonder why they wander all over the place, that's why. The issue is, even if they fix this, there's no way to make them just hold position and shoot. The old games didn't have this either, but you could assign them to guard mode to a ship, and if that ship stayed still, they'd also hang out there. It wasn't perfect, but they behaved, and the core problem is Homeworld 3's ships do not, along with everything else buggy that can happen. You can order support frigates to guard a ship to heal it and vessels around it, and it works sometimes. Which is similar to some occasions where units forget they're alive and just sit there until you poke them. You tell Strikecraft to dock, and instead they don't and keep getting in fights. You know, I've played RTS games where some functions just never worked, and you learn to live with that. It's like the difference of your internet being out compared to agonizingly slow. I don't have a better way to put it, all the Higaran pilots seem fucking plastered. Friends, it has been years since I played an RTS game that was this inconsistent. And I'm including the launch version of Warhammer 3. I know it's gotten a lot better, but it's not time yet. To make it more maddening, it's inconsistent across game modes. It seems like guard mode works way better in war games, and I don't know why. Like, check this out, even the torpedo frigates are acting correctly here. Or here where, well, the support ship got a bit lost. But then you'll notice sometimes functions aren't working due to game balance. Like, take the Kar-Kushan. It's a big centerpiece vessel that you can easily concentrate a fleet around. But for some reason beyond me, for a ship this big, it moves like Jesse Owens. It's outrunning the fleet that's trying to guard it. And the campaign gives you a passive speed upgrade on top of that. The result is a gargantuan fuck you factory ship that moves really fast, with units that are very inconsistent in their behaviors. This makes the most viable strategy blobbing everything around it and just charging forward. With the state of the game, the tactical options around that are just too unreliable, especially when the time to kill for ships is ridiculously fast even after the buffs they made after the demo. I melted through one of the bosses so quickly that it actually started skipping his lines. Battle cruisers, which should be terrifying, are instead just pitiful. And unfortunately, this goes for yours too. Once again, except in war games, where they're buffed up and very dangerous, and also behave better. For whatever reason, a lot of ships will only try to engage each other on a similar plane, instead of using all of 3D space to fight from whatever's a good firing angle. Sure, one effect is the battles don't physically look as dynamic, but more importantly, it goes in the list of why isn't my ship doing what I told it to. It might be trying to line up evenly with an enemy, like they're space jousting, or the enemy ships will slam face down into yours, like a school of Amazonian catfish who just smelled the biggest Gushers enjoyer take a hot piss in the river. I am sorry if this is more disorganized, but there are so many issues hitting at once, it's hard to pick where to start. It's like being attacked by a bear and my head is on fire, I don't know what to scream about first. Okay, let's roll back a bit to the time to kill thing. How do you mitigate it without a flat health buff? What they settled on was directional damage. If you hit the enemies from the sides and the back, it'll hit them harder. The previous games had this as well, and the best tactic, like here, is to hit them in the back. The issue is enemies already die from the front quickly enough, and unless they're strikecraft, the time you spent maneuvering around them could have just been spent killing them. Well, Homeworld 2 beefed up capital ships and added subsystems. Cataclysm sort of had this first, but this is a way better implementation. Besides letting you customize and upgrade your ships a bit more, it made capital fights a lot more tactical. You could target enemy missile batteries or facilities that made smaller craft. They were longer fights and more engaging because you decided what to cripple first. Directional armor was still in play too, so you had a lot to consider. Capital ship battles could still become a blobby slugfest, but during that you could play the game on a micro level, launching bombing runs in facilities, filling their fuel tanks with sand, whatever. It was maybe the best gameplay addition Homeworld 2 brought, and it's not here. Now, the gameplay reason is that, I don't know. I don't have all the answers, I don't know what's going on.
I gotta get you out of here! Ah!
The closest thing you get is that some campaign maps have a facility you can take down that'll stop enemies from spawning there, but that is separated from the core fights. There's a lot of other features that would make sense to have, like we're back to building individual strikecraft and not squadrons like Homeworld 2, and in the campaign, battle damage to your ship stays between missions. So then, why not have the veterancy from Cataclysm or Deserts of Carrick? Actually, if the mothership is going to be so proactive now, that power shunting mechanic could have been great here too. And yeah, I know it's usually low-hanging fruit to go, the new games don't have things the old games had. I would understand more if Homeworld 3 was just different, but it's a step backwards in multiple areas. So let's talk about things that are new, like unit abilities. In the demo, these had no drawbacks, and you would basically want to spam them as soon as they were off cooldown. In theory, you could time them more tactically, but there was barely a reason to with the fast cooldown, and the effects would usually be a flat speed or damage buff, or some kind of active extra damage ability. A few of these were reworked before launch to have some kind of trade-off. So some have more thought, but others are still click every 45 seconds for extra targeted damage. So a lot of the micro potential is selecting a ship to use an ability to shoot a ship you were already shooting, or increase the max range of torpedo frigates temporarily, which currently makes them more of a problem. The mothership's missile is neat, but it's in the same territory. If you could autocast a bunch of these, I bet people would do it and not look back. Plus, you already can autocycle some like the bomber's cloak. There are precious few utility abilities, and some are just bad, like do you want to turn off all the battlecruiser's guns to buff its allies? Though with how bad the battlecruiser is, maybe that's okay. Once again, the abilities could make sense if you're having to maneuver into a vulnerable position and then fire away and maybe it had a longer cooldown, but the time to kill is already so fast that that factor doesn't matter. And all of this factors into the space structures as well. You can use them as physical cover or to hide from sensors, or navigate through tunnels. They introduce it as a great way to flank enemies, vanishing from sensors, appearing somewhere else, and then hitting them from the back. Or you can do a kind of Death Star run through a trench to avoid enemy fire. Unfortunately, it only comes across as a gimmick, and even when it's first introduced, you can completely ignore it to no consequence. The idea of space cover is interesting, but ultimately, I just wished I could stick vessels onto the mothership. If they could stick to a side of it consistently, that rotation move could be really fun. Right now the cover is rarely useful, and if you set them to the stance to utilize it more, they'll usually weave between it and expose them to more fire. Which means you have to babysit them to use it effectively, when you could just be death blobbing again. Homeworld 3's problem is multiple design and functionality issues colliding at once. On paper, I understand how all of this should work, but it doesn't right now. Even if it did, it's still streamlined down from 20 years of games that came before. The entire USP of the game is built around a feature you can mainly ignore, and this also ended up hurting the campaign. There are 13 missions, a few of those are basically tutorials, and you feel very limited until about mission 7. They at least try to make the mission structure unique every time. It could be capturing points, a defense mission, a long battle with a boss fight. The issue here is that most of these maps are dominated by megastructures, and they're also small. You might have noticed this, but there is barely any footage of me using my sensors menu because I rarely needed it. There are no long treks across space or using nebulas anymore. Starting off in the skies of Higara does look amazing, but you're still above a planet and you never go to the emptiness of space. You have nothing to actually contrast the megastructures against, and this makes everything feel closed in and limiting, and the gameplay mechanics just push that harder. To make it worse, as short and simple as these early missions are, you are bombarded with cutscenes. You can be interrupted multiple times in the space of 2 minutes, and some are just nothing. I just need to capture some points and, oh damn it. When the mission is done, you're then automatically sent to the next with no control on your end. You can still capture everything to make a death fleet, which is easier than ever, and this makes the game a cakewalk, so I tried to avoid that actually. Either way, the campaign feels small, with rushed and jarring pacing, which feels insane to say looking at these environments. Not that they have a 3-week elevator or anything, but man. And there were lots of other things too that didn't return from previous games, but it just feels like nitpicking when the core of the game is in this state. Besides, there's still a whole story and more to talk about, and if you don't want spoilers, skip to here. Alright, let's do it. Imogen is sent to track down Karen, who Higaran Command has lost communication with. To be extra safe, Command will be cutting off communication with Imogen immediately. Good start. But first, the Kar-Kushan needs production facilities installed at Space Station 315. Until, of course, you're ambushed by pirates. There's a lot I find interesting about this. There's a large tray that floats over with dramatic music, which evokes the cryo trays from Homeworld proper. How the pirates are introduced and the look of them is very similar to the Tyrannic Raiders. It's like they're trying to remix the visuals but without the substance, because Carrick isn't burning and you're not essentially discovering aliens for the first time. Though the number 315 is an activation phrase for me. It makes me think of James 3:15, and we'll use the King James version. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. Then this is followed up in 3:16 with, for where envying and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. This is very appropriate today. Basically, these passages and the ones before are discussing what true wisdom is. In context, self-centered envious people who think they have wisdom do not have true wisdom. In this case, divine wisdom that comes from God. You're not truly wise if you think you got there by being dishonest and generally horrible, which is dead on for one of the characters. And sure, it is just a number, it can mean any biblical passage or be their door passcode, but it's something. Something for me to think about besides them trying to push their stupid catchphrase.
Sands and sinners. Sands and sinners, how did I get here?
Sands and sinners. You have to push through it.
If you drop a line like this 3 times in 3 minutes, most people are going to catch on to what you're trying to do. I'm very sorry, but I will not be buying a t-shirt today. When it comes to writing, there are more signs of little things having gone wrong. Like Fleet Intelligence Officer Isaac identifies the enemy as Kalen pirates, giving you pointers to take them down, and then later Imogen asks who they are and he explains that they're Kalen pirates. Sure, it's an inconsequential detail, but very early in the game. Probably a small thing that had to be rearranged for some production reason. I look at this in a different light now because I've seen the credits. Can you guess how many people have a narrative credit on the story? 3? Maybe 4? Now it could be they were generous, and if anyone had any story idea, they got a writing credit. I've consulted on some story stuff in games before without that kind of credit. I don't think there was ever a writing room with 14 people, at least, God, I hope not, but I have a deep suspicion this story may have gone through some huge revisions and it was a very messy process. Anyhow, the pirates can hyperspace through solid matter. This technology should be beyond them, and Isaac says they're not smart enough to do it themselves. The Higarans themselves can't do this, so where do they get this technology? Being new to Fleet Command, Imogen is deeply affected by hearing pilots die. After Sands and Sinners, this is where I truly realized there would not be much subtlety in the writing. Things you could figure out have to be spelled out to you.
The losses, but I don't want to forget them.
May the burden remain.
Sorry?
It's an old Pactu saying. Even in victory, there is loss. Forget that, it's to forget them. May the burden remain.
This reminds me of a great line from Homeworld.
Extermination of our planet was the consequence. The subject did not survive interrogation.
And it just lingers on the shot of space. That says everything. If that scene took place in this game, Imogen would ask, "What do you mean? Their methods were harsh." Isn't that wrong? They destroyed our planet, Imogen. It doesn't mean we have to be monsters too. I am getting ahead of myself because you haven't seen the melodrama this game has, but it genuinely feels like a YA novel. When Imogen said she felt horrible for their losses but didn't want to forget them, and Isaac said let the burden remain, you could probably put 2 and 2 together. And a super genius like Imogen probably would too. It is possible this is a way of showing her character isn't connected to Kushan culture. Besides being entombed in the core, she has an extra set of literal walls around her. But she's not cold, or I don't care how many lives it takes, the mission comes first. She clearly already cares about her people and feels awful when she loses them. So at worst, it seems like she spent most of her time in a laboratory doing STEM nerd shit and doesn't know some basic things and is just kind of awkward. Whenever she jumps to hyperspace, she has strange visions of what appear to be Stinger Flynn's island. A mysterious voice calls out to her, telling her to impose her will. I kind of wish I wrote a will before playing the fucking game. When you finally catch up to the Kalen pirates, they call you the War Sage and accuse you of working for her. They don't elaborate on what this is, but change their mind during the fight, saying they're caught between an oblivious giant and a mad god. They die before they can drop any more hints, but Isaac still delivers a rousing speech to the crew. He gives them the full declassified mission briefing so they know the stakes, know how dangerous the anomaly is, but reassures them they have the finest ship and navigator in the entire fleet. It's a dense speech, but when Imogen asks if what he said was true, she clearly means, does he really think she's the best navigator?
Do you truly believe that, Isaac?
Believe what?
What you just told the fleet.
Out there, in battle, doubt can kill you just as fast as hard vacuum. They need you to bury yours, so they can overcome theirs.
So we lie to them?
Isn't that immoral?
I think what I hate so much about this is, it's the exact opposite of Homeworld Cataclysm. The Somta were a looked down upon mining clan who rose to a galactic challenge and succeeded. They won in spite of their lowly status, using tools not meant for the job. Imogen Sajet is a super genius who was mentored by Karen Sajet when she was 5. She's the granddaughter of the space president and flying the most advanced ship ever. When Isaac gives a speech to rally their already wounded forces, she finger wags him for being slightly dishonest, and the dishonesty is implied to be about his faith in her particularly. This goes beyond self-doubt into just being self-centered. He's trying to keep the crew together as billions are dying, but since they wanted to tell a story about Imogen's self-doubt, it all comes across as extremely petty and stupid. It almost seems like there was a reason the series didn't have much direct character drama. Trailing Karen, they discover the Incarnate, who bear the sign of Sejuk. They're able to use scavenged progenitor tech and seem like they have some connection to the voice in Imogen's hyperspace mind palace. But get this, Karen, while comatose, is there too, and Imogen reminisces on all the time they spent together when she was a child.
Always remember the things I have taught you, Imogen, no matter what the future brings. You are going to burn very bright, my little star. I know goodbyes are hard. Let me sing our lullaby.
I'm convinced there is no way Imogen wasn't Karen's daughter or granddaughter in a previous draft. The reveal she's related to the space president is very brief and never brought up again, and all her flashbacks with Karen seem way more familial. Like they hung out that much when she was a kid to the point that they have a special lullaby. Everything is too intense for just a mentor or Karen's legendary status. This is either Gran or a band from a school zone.
I like it, cut G.
The dream voice is real, and so is Karen. Through hyperspace, unbound, whatever, they're all connected mentally. Karen really is comatose somewhere, and the voice wants Imogen to find her. But the Incarnate are hell-bent on slowing her down, including obliterating the entire planet so they could hyperspace the chunks in to try and destroy her. The Incarnate are obviously somehow behind the anomaly, killing millions just for a chance to take down the Kar Kushan. Of course Imogen turns to her lullaby.
Zealots, deluded fanatics, worse than the Gulsian.
Worse than the Galcian. Those guys who were completely correct? Maybe I'm just crazy, but after their prophecy was proven entirely true, and the survivors, including the Galcian, understood the context that led to their religion, I would think that maybe the perception of them has changed in the hundreds of years since that game. But if you're just trying to make an epic reference without thinking it through, you go, the Galcian were zealots in that game, I'll just bring that up. I hate to say it, but this is genuine, did you actually play the game's territory? This isn't some tiny piece of background fluff, it's the entire tragedy of that game. And it only gets more insane from here, like Imogen needs to access a progenitor facility to try and repair her hyperspace cores, Karen had already been there, so she then locked it out, or something. As always, Imogen turns to her special lullaby.
Success. Pattern match found.
What?
How? System, explain.
Data corruption pattern is a 97.6% mathematical match to requested waveform.
My lullaby.
The lullaby is the key to all this. You know what? Fuck it. The voice is called the Incarnate Queen, and she wants to kill billions because she thinks that, navigators are superior to regular people. But the Queen needs even more cores for ultimate power, which Karen did have aboard the Car Juke, so she's hidden it away somewhere. The Queen wants Imogen to find her so she gets access to the cores, but is also interested in Imogen as another navigator. So why was the Incarnate endlessly trying to kill her? Fuck if I know. Oh man.
So, it is you.
You always knew, clever girl.
It's the scene, and as far as I can tell, Imogen just gets big because she's confident now. I don't know, even people like Gnarly Gnome can do that. The Queen is maybe the reincarnation of her progenitor or something, it doesn't matter. She's incredibly childish. She declares herself the will of the universe, but wants Imogen and Karen to join her. She thinks she's wise and divine, but she's not, and if anything, a bit of an idiot.
What would Karen's Sajet be if Carrick had not burned?
Yeah, Karen Sajet was a real fuck up until then. Believe it or not, I actually am filtering out all kinds of other stupid tangents, because there are just too many here. Like Isaac has a long argument with Imogen saying Karen can't possibly be alive, though we know that Unbound don't work that way. You kill the real War Sage, so the pirates weren't affiliated with the Incarnate, and it's never explained how they had control of hyperspace like that then. Imogen then apologizes for killing the War Sage, and the Queen says human lives don't matter like navigators do. She has this all-encompassing, gigantic cloak, but it's also clearly a large security blanket. The Queen is immature and insecure. Her own people hated and distrusted her after her own actions, so now she views common people as only being thralls, and the few navigators like her can be equals. They still both want to get to Karen, and Imogen tracks her down deep through an ice core. You watch the mothership go deeper and deeper, narrowly navigating through chasms of ice, when they finally find it. It's a gorgeous, emotional piece of music, but at this point, I'm just wondering why the ship is out in the open and we dug through all that ice. This isn't like Titan AE, it is right there.
Lady Karen, it's me, it's Imogen. I felt you calling me.
Yes, Imogen. I called out to you as soon as I sensed your presence.
You know, mysticism in Homeworld was a framework. It wasn't supposed to be actual magical things happening. When you think in space magic, you get scenes like this.
The lullaby. When you sent your distress call, I was only a child. How could you have known that I would find it?
I didn't know, Imogen, but I hoped. And here you are.
Fuck it. Karen just figured the 6-year-old she knew would one day grow up to be Fleet Command, and would follow in her footsteps, and also would still like that lullaby she taught her when she was a kid, and would then sing it to unlock the hyperspace repair thingy, and then track her down. Because she had faith in her when she was, like, watching Tigger. Fucking what? That's insane! This story is insane! I don't need to break down what's wrong about this, it's just obvious nonsense. It would be like me saying, yeah, I taught my neighbor's little kid the Dora the Explorer theme song, and then banked my entire plan on repairing an aircraft carrier for her to say, come on Vamanos 20 years later. There's more to unpack, but stuff like this puts it in the why bother category. Isaac gives Imogen a long speech where he's sorry for not trusting her. Then the next mission starts.
All ships, prepare to fire.
Isaac, no!
I need you to trust me now, Imogen.
It's circular, who cares? Imogen and Karen both show up because they're gonna plug the hyperspace cores into her big hyperspace ship thing. The Queen thinks since Imogen can make cores, they can have a new race of navigators, but that's not going to happen. By overloading the cores, it causes a hyperspace something, and Karen sacrifices herself to die with the Queen. After destroying habitable worlds and killing billions, the truth is, she was just lonely. So her and Karen will hold hands as they die in this magical, sparkly realm. And I'm sorry, but I don't feel that bad for Security Blanket Mega Hitler. I just don't. She blew up a whole planet to slow us down, even though she wanted us to go there. This is fucking nonsense. Who would have thought it would end this way? Oh, man. Oh, shit. That was a real edit. I didn't do that. None of this works because the Queen had nothing to tempt Imogen with. She was just kind of awkward and didn't hate her own people or was outcast or anything. She was just a little weird. The Queen wanted to take away the burden of caring about people, but she was saying let the burden remain right from the very start. They may be currently trapped beyond the gates, but now Imogen is happy, and her hologram of Karen could sing the lullaby all the time. It's not just a bad story, it's a shockingly bad story. It's a kind I thought just did not exist anymore. Homeworld 3's story is like seeing a woolly mammoth in your yard, and also realizing it has leprosy. It's the worst I've seen in a mainstream game in a long time. But hey, war games. This is what it's really all about, right? Skirmish is barely worth a mention because there are only 6 maps, 3 being 1v1s, no tech tree, or much of anything else there. You can play it, but there's not much to it. War games is meant for 3-player co-op, and you can do it solo, but you're going to be capturing a lot if you do that. This setup is easy. You complete objectives on a map, and then find or earn artifacts to upgrade your ships. These will unlock different upgrade branches and will change every time. As you level up or do challenges, you might unlock new kinds of artifacts or new starting fleet types. So as you go through a run, you could focus on what ships to upgrade and make something really fun and intuitive to use. For some reason, a lot of Homeworld's mechanics work more reliably in war games. They're still pretty drunk, but it's like they're eating a burger or something now. For starters, this does need to be properly balanced for the number of players, because this will become a solo activity within a few years. Finding 2 friends to play Homeworld with is already tricky. Finding 2 friends to play Homeworld 3 with is going to be much harder. Currently, it's not very satisfying either, as you only run through 3 levels, and then you're done. There are only 7 maps in total, and sometimes the final mission feels like it should be a middle mission. Like originally this would be 7 maps in a row, but they thought that would wear it out too quickly, so randomized it to try and give it more length. It's okay currently, but if they do polish up the mechanics and add all the stuff they said they would in the next year, it might be really fun. They are going to support modding too, so maybe there's future potential there as well. But there is something deeply sad about seeing Homeworld becoming so multiplayer focused, and focused on a co-op game mode like this instead of Skirmish. The series always had great single player and multiplayer, but the fun here seems to be focused on the latter. It is fun synchronizing with your friends, coordinating taking objectives, making a balanced fleet, and discussing the story of Homeworld 3.
I never saw Karen as that. Like, she was important, yes, but she was never...
I've come to appreciate war games more for that, because the game basically comes with its own built-in group therapy mode. If war games does sound fun to you though, there's no reason to buy this now compared to waiting another year and seeing where it's at. In the end though, I can't recommend Homeworld 3. They could polish the gameplay up, add a fun multiplayer mode, a lot to Skirmish. The story is unsalvageable. This isn't the first series to go through this and won't be the last, but thankfully, those old games are always there. When they first revealed the Kushan, in the in-game sense, I thought it was carrying on the spirit of all its people. On a meta level, I thought it would carry over things from all the Homeworld games before it. It's still a perfect representation of the game. It's sleek, but slimmed down. It's thinly imitating something that came before it. And deep in the core of it, there's a madness that will slowly be revealed to you. From all the delays and massive layoffs, it's clear something was going wrong during development. It could be there was once something better, or maybe this was salvaged from an even bigger mess. All I know is, I'm glad this is over. My audio equipment began breaking during this video, and I don't know if it's a curse. What does it feel like seeing every IP you've loved turn into this? It feels great. What was my Eagle Scout project? That was a long time ago, but we built a bunch of benches and picnic tables for a men's homeless shelter. I'm not sure if they're still there. Favorite video game soundtracks? My mind always goes right to Morrowind, but also Red Alert 2, Jet Set Radio, Outer Wilds, there's a whole bunch. If my question did not get picked, can I repost it in subsequent videos until it does? Well, I've answered this now, so now I don't even know. As I progress through the circle of life, am I surprised at how my tastes have changed? I don't know. On that front, it feels like I was mainly done cooking a while ago. There is some stuff I liked as a kid that I still like, but other stuff I never seek out these days, like platformers. I think I need to play more stuff outside of my usual area, which is already weird, and then maybe I'll know where I'm at a little bit better. This was at least a safe bet in not liking something though. My PC and brain are falling apart a bit more this round, so next time will be better.
There is no withdrawal from the garden.